Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. I'm Bob Oberlies. I'm a partner at Fredrikson. I co-chair our cross-border M&A practice and head our Asia practice. I'll give further background on myself and our other speakers in a moment, but just a few housekeeping items. We'd like to thank the co-sponsors of today's webinar, Global Minnesota, along with the Minnesota International Business Council and the Minnesota Committee on Foreign Relations. Thank you to each of these organizations for the great work they do in advancing international understanding and engagement. In terms of cadence today, we'll plan to address questions at the end of the program. To submit questions, send them through the chat box, and you should be able to access that through the chat button on the bottom of your screen. Quick intro to Fredrikson. Fredrikson's a full-service law firm of more than 400 lawyers, with 10 offices around the world, headquartered in Minneapolis, and with offices abroad in China and Mexico. I'll say a quick word, too, about our M&A team. We closed 340 deals last year. Nearly 40% of those were of a cross-border nature, so we have a good viewpoint on the impact of some of the recent U.S. policies on our clients, both as they operate domestically and abroad. Joined today by Tom Hanson. Tom is a former U.S. Foreign Service officer with the Department of State, whose diplomatic postings included East Germany, France, Norway, the Soviet Union, Sweden, and the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. He also participated in the opening of new U.S. embassies in Mongolia and Estonia, worked on the Foreign Relations Committee of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, and served as director for NATO and European Affairs at the Atlantic Council of the U.S. in Washington, D.C. Mr. Hanson currently is diplomat in residence at the Ellsworth Institute for International Affairs at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and has taught diplomacy at Carleton College. He is a past board member of the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights and director at the Institute for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He is also a member of the U.S. Foreign Policy Working Group of the British International Studies Association, as well as the Council of Advisors at the Museum of Russian Art and the Minnesota Peace Initiative at Norway House. I'm also joined by my colleague, Mike Meagher, who serves as the Chief Representative of Fredrikson's Shanghai office, and he's based full-time in China. Mike has legal experience as both a law firm lawyer and as China General Counsel of a global special situations acquisition firm. He also has 8 years of financial experience as an investment banker, heading the Shanghai office of a global investment banking firm specializing in cross-border M&A. Mike is joining us from Shanghai today, his evening. With those intros, I'll set the stage a bit with a few observations based on what I'm seeing with my clients, and then we'll turn it over to Tom and Mike. So 100 days ago, we were told that Trump would be advancing U.S. trade policy through several key strategies. This included reviewing trade agreements to rectify unfair trade practices and trade deficits, pushing policies to grow domestic U.S. production, attract U.S. investment, cutting taxes, cutting regulations, cutting costs. These are all the things that we were kind of anticipating. And then, of course, we were told to expect an aggressive shift in U.S. tariff policy. 100 days in, technically 107 days in, we've seen 143 executive orders. Many of these were focused on shrinking the federal government, energy production, tariffs. I think some of our clients had anticipated that some of the regulatory rollbacks, even though it's very difficult to kind of keep up with the executive orders, and we've been helping a lot of clients try to do that, some of these rollbacks in environmental and labor rules should lower compliance costs, certainly in energy and manufacturing sectors. Certain companies in deregulated sectors will gain a level of operational flexibility. I think for those who watched the cabinet meeting last week that went around the table, Secretary of Commerce Lutnick claimed that Trump had secured over $8 trillion in private sector investment commitments, which raised a lot of eyebrows in terms of how that, where $8 trillion, that's an enormous number. And I think what he was saying is that it's commitments, and apparently tech companies have committed 2.5 trillion. Sovereign wealth funds have committed another 3 trillion. And then pharma, auto, and other companies have committed over 3 trillion. So together, they're counting that as 8 trillion, which, even if a fraction of that materialized, that would be a level of foreign investment that, would no doubt have a huge impact on growth and reindustrializing the U.S. But we'll see how much of that actually does materialize. Regulatory rollbacks and cost cutting is reported to save $1 trillion over the next decade. I think all of DOJ's work at one point, there was, I think, maybe some optimism that they were going to get that sooner, but I think they're now at something like 160 billion, per year. So rolled out over 10 years, that's about $1 trillion. Ultimately, though, there's been a lot of, I think Trump's detractors would definitely point out that there's been massive market turmoil caused by the tariff rollout and a lot of questions about how it was rolled out, whether it could have been rolled out in a better way. And the S&P dropped close to 2% in a single day. And it's really been exacerbating fears of recession and economic downturn. A lot of the 143 executive orders are facing legal scrutiny there's hundreds of lawsuits challenging these actions. So that's causing a lot of uncertainty as well. I think in short, you have supporters, they're sort of praising aggressive actions and economic deregulation and fulfilling campaign promises. Detractors counter that, his economic missteps and legal overreach, it's leading to a lot of market chaos and uncertainty and instability and unnecessary instability. I think for our clients, it's been a bit of a mixed bag so far. Certainly the anticipation of tax cut extensions and deregulation appear to be sustaining a decent level of M&A activity. I think the Q1 2025 U.S. M&A deal volume looks strong compared to last year, and it looks like private equity levels are trending upward in terms of domestic transactions. Anecdotally, we are seeing a fair amount of inbound activity, U.S. investment from Europe and Asia, and I say anecdotal because we have not been keeping statistics on this, but it certainly in my practice and in our group we're seeing more, and that started over a year ago, but that seems to be increasing and continuing. One significant impact for us in terms of M&A deals is it does appear to have an impact, has been having an impact on deal timeframes. A lot of our transactions that traditionally would get done, within a few weeks are getting drawn out, and sometimes it's just, you discover that the target has, some exposure to Mexico or China or Canada or wherever, and then it's trying to figure out, what that true exposure is, depending on what the tariff policy is going to be, which of course nobody knows for many of these countries. So it creates some challenges on how to assess that, and there's different mechanisms that we've been helping clients with, and Mike can talk a little bit about that later. So, I think generally the impact on deals is that it's drawing out the time frames. We are seeing some deals that get killed once they discover there's a certain, very significant exposure to China or whatever tariff exposure. But it's, I would say, rare. More often what we're seeing is just that it's dragging out time frames, and seeing some European clients who are saying, we're doing this deal, we're just going to wait until we see how the tariffs shake out, but we are definitely doing it, so just hold on. So that's going to delay another couple months or so. So this is a deal that they'd like to do, but they can't do it right now because they need to see what the tariff situation looks like. There's, I think on the regulatory side, there does appear to be a shift in DOJ and FTC priorities on, away from aggressive merger enforcement and creating a more permissive environment for domestic M&A. Unclear whether that's going to be the same for foreign acquisitions in the U.S., potentially not. But at least for U.S. domestic deals, we're seeing, and certainly in the tech sector and AI, a lot more appears to be more permissive in terms of getting deals done. I think another big question is whether Trump will get through his legislative package. He's been criticized for not really getting much passed at all compared to past administrations and compared to his first administration. And so, he's talking about this big, beautiful bill that it's supposed to be tackling all of the key priorities through a single piece of legislation. So, and that's going to include tax cuts and energy policy and the government spending reductions, and they're trying to get that passed through a reconciliation process so that they can bypass the Senate's filibuster and pass with a simple majority. So that's a big question. If they can do that, that will generally be good for a lot of our clients in terms of extending tax cuts and all of the campaign promises in terms of no tax on tips and overtime pay and an extension of the oil and gas production. So a lot of sort of business-friendly policies is wrapped up in that, but there's, they're kind of putting a lot of their eggs in that. And so if that doesn't pass, that'll have, potentially quite a significant negative impact. By far, Trump's tariff policies have attracted the most attention and probably required, the most amount of energy for a lot of our clients to trying to figure how to deal with them. And Mike will be discussing that in detail shortly. I'll just note that the average U.S. tariff rate rose to 27%, and that's the highest in over a century. And many of our clients faced higher input costs literally overnight, requiring very sweeping supply chain reconfigurations that we've been helping them with. Custom and Border Patrol audits have surged in the first quarter. And we're seeing that with some clients too. And some of these are quite substantive in terms of customs zeroing in on maybe abuses, past practices that were overlooked. Some of them seem a little bit more de minimis, but it does seem like there's just a heck of a lot more attention at the border in terms of the use of the right codes, where it's coming from, and a lot more scrutiny on that front. I think the big question too is whether they're going to be able to land a lot of these trade deals. We saw this morning that Treasury Secretary Besson is going to be meeting with China's Vice Premier He Lifeng in Switzerland over the weekend. So unclear whether that's presumably that's positive, but we'll see. But a lot is riding on whether they can really, secure these trade agreements. And there's talk that they have an agreement already with India, and many other trading partners are very close. Certainly many offers on the table, but the sort of the devil's in details in terms of what they can actually get done in the next couple months. So maybe to try to make sense of all this, we have Tom here, so hopefully Tom can shed some light on how we got here and where we might be headed.
Well, thanks so much, Bob. Thank you also to the organizers of this event. A little over 100 days in. I'll try to provide a little bit of policy context, looking back at Trump's sort of constant focus on tariffs, really, since he first wrote an article for the major newspapers decades ago, saying basically that everyone's taking advantage of us. This has been his reflex, really, throughout his political life, and we're seeing it now in spades in his second term. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. It's producing a lot of anxiety. I see this, where I teach, among students, among people I'm talking to, in the community. The barrage of actions that Bob described are still shaking down. It's early in this administration. It could be that this is part of a transactional strategy, setting the stage for some major agreements, even with China. There's the madman theory of negotiation, where this is exactly what you would do before trying to strike deals, but it could also be a more uncontrolled process that's going to lead to further decoupling and strains on the global economy and on the U.S. economy. So it's really too early to come to a decided conclusion on this, in my view. Looking back at Trump in his first term, in 2017, there were very warm relations with China, with Xi Jinping. The Chinese were quite optimistic about the relationship, but then in 2018, in March, that's when the tariff shift began, with a round of tariffs followed up in June with an even larger round. China retaliated, as it's doing now, by cutting off certain rare earth minerals. That's part of their playbook. The relationship worsened in 2019. Mike Pompeo, who then was the Secretary of State, declared the Uyghur situation in Xinjiang a genocide and began to focus on the Communist Party of China as a destabilizing element, almost raising a sense of regime change as a goal of U.S. policy. So tensions were pretty high at the end of that administration. When Biden came in, he basically kept the same approach. He retained the tariffs. Anthony Blinken repeated Pompeo's assertion on the Uyghurs and genocide, doubled down. Biden really focused, his paradigm for his foreign policy was autocracy versus democracy. And so he saw things very much in terms of a global struggle between those two forms of government, in which Ukraine, Taiwan were frontline struggles. The current administration has very little of that. In fact, they've been very critical of that kind of binary approach to foreign policy. So that's a change right now. But the Biden team focused very much on national security. And in that context, they took forward-leaning steps on Taiwan. Biden declared 4 times that we would defend it militarily. We declared Taiwan a U.S. national security interest, which we'd never done before, which implied we wanted it to stay separate and part of our security architecture in Asia. And all the Biden policies on tech, CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, all the things that we've seen were very much in a national security context, and the military implications of these technologies. And so, for many businesses, already there were difficulties with the Xinjiang Declaration in terms of making sure you weren't dealing with a genocidal company, but also being on the entity list. How do you figure out if some company has any contacts to the Chinese military? This was and still is a problem for U.S. business and U.S. law firms as they try to advise how to interact in China. And toward the end of the Biden term, you also had in Congress the formation of a bipartisan commission focused on China. One sign of the bipartisan agreement that China now should be the focus and is the greatest challenge to the United States today. So against that backdrop of tensions with China, but a national security focus primarily, in comes Trump, and a less of an influence or focus on the national security issues so far, very much a focus on trade. Once again, we're being taken advantage of. That was his main point in his inaugural address, and he now is really going ahead with tariffs. As he said, I am a tariff man. The last president who said that was McKinley. And in sort of announcing that he was going to focus on tariffs, he said on X that people should not look at the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s if they want to understand tariffs. The Depression was already underway. He said, quote, if you want to study tariffs and how powerful they are, studying the administration of President William McKinley is what you need to do. America had so much money, they didn't even know what to do with it. So there's this sense that tariffs are going to generate income. Trump has set up an external revenue service now to go along with the internal revenue service. So very high expectations on this. And they're being reinforced by his policy advisors, which is also different, who have framed for him a long-term strategy on tariffs. And this is, I think, why he's being so dogged in sticking to the tariffs now, saying we need short-term pain for long-term gain. Especially Stephen Moran, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, has had, I think, is having a big impact. Moran wrote in November 2024 an influential 41-page paper called A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. And at that time, he, on X, made the following point. He said, you need revenue from somewhere. Our deficits are becoming unsustainable. Better to take tariffs from low levels to high than to take corporate or income taxes from already high levels to even higher. In other words, he put this in the context of keeping taxes low and even reducing taxes. So in this paper, Moran harkens back to the Plaza Accords of 1985. At that time, we had a similar problem. The dollar was very strong, and we convinced our allies to take certain steps to bring the dollar down, to help U.S. exports, theoretically help U.S. manufacturing, help us with the deficit. And this is the same idea now this time. The idea is you put on heavy taxes, tariffs on a wide range of countries. Then you approach them with carrots and sticks. The stick is, especially for allies, do you want us to defend you or not? So go along with this idea now of helping us on the dollar. And then the carrot is, we will reduce these tariffs that we just put in place if you go along with us. And so Moran's idea was for a Mar-a-Lago Accord, a big meeting at Mar-a-Lago in which countries would come together and basically coordinate to help us bring the dollar down and get at our deficit. The fact that the dollar is a safe haven drives it up artificially. And this is what this long-term strategy is trying to get at. Now, of course, once Liberation Day was declared, as Bob pointed out, the markets declined significantly. And pretty soon the bond market was gyrating. And that was the point at which, reportedly, Scott Bessent went to Trump. I think Bessent is a little less ideological on this than Moran, and said, look, you've got to do something here. So what Bessent reportedly advised was 90-day pause on the tariffs for other countries. And during this time, ramp up the tariffs on China to a very high degree. And then in dealing with these other countries, encourage them to help us with our dollar, but also to back off from China, to stop engaging as much with China. And this would become a lever. And so I think this is what we're seeing playing out right now as we're approaching countries individually, keeping the tariffs high on China. Now, is this a strategy that could work out? There's much less talk about a specific Mar-a-Lago Accord, but I think there is still a long-term plan to use the situation they've created now with these tariffs to reach the goals I just described. Is this realistic? Is the rest of the world going to come around? Or will we end up, in a sense, isolating ourselves and even contributing to a de-dollarization potentially? So I think it's worth taking a look at how other countries are reacting so far to this. And starting with China, in his New Year's talk to the Chinese people, already Xi Jinping signaled that they were going to be tough this time, tougher than during Trump 1. He said the watchword is basically retaliation, redistribution, readjusting, right, in the global economy. And so for the first time in 5 years, a couple of weeks ago, Chinese officials met with their counterparts from South Korea and Japan to discuss trade. China is looking very much at Asia now. Xi Jinping made a tour of several Southeast Asian countries which are facing tariffs, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia. And in these visits, the Chinese are going back to something that they first raised in 2014, but have let sort of go. But now they're bringing it back very strongly, and that is talk of a regional security model. And Xi unveiled this approach right before his Southeast Asia tour last month at a Central Party conference. And he said that for the future now, China is the dependable partner in Asia. We want to create a shared Asian home. We have to join together to protect ourselves against American unpredictability and unilateral bullying, as Xi said. We need Eastern wisdom. And so this is trying to fill the vacuum we've created here now. The Chinese are actively now trying to work out trade deals, but also with this new concept of an Asian approach that now has become necessary, in which China can be a dependable partner. So there's more and more discussion in China now of the Belt and Road, the BRICS. The BRICS are going to have some major meetings this year. They're expanding. BRICS Pay. If you go online to the BRICS Pay website, you'll see a description of a clearinghouse platform using not yet a digital currency, but using the currencies of the BRICS members amongst themselves without the dollar to conduct their trade and their business. And this is actually pretty far along now. Trump has threatened 100% tariffs against any BRICS country that gets involved in that kind of an arrangement that would undermine the dollar. So China also, will, I think in this context, try once again to stimulate domestic consumptions. Right now, domestic consumption is about 40% of Chinese GDP. The OECD average is 60%. So they certainly got a ways to go there. And of course, China's even applied to join the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which we created the TPP, but we've pulled out. And in addition to our tariffs, we still have not re-engaged in economic structures in Asia. And so China, I think, sees this as an opening to expand their influence. In 2024, China had $440 billion of exports to the U.S., according to recent statistics, 440 billion. They received from the U.S. 144 billion imports. So that's the imbalance. But going forward now, it's estimated that the U.S. relies on Chinese imports in 10% of our product categories. That's a lot. And when the heads of the major box stores went to meet with Trump last month, they had two words for him: empty shelves. And this is what we're going to be watching now going forward as this unfolds. Now, looking at other reactions, the Europeans are banding together. They're also worried about our commitment, our defense commitment. Some of the statements made by Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance at the Munich conference have got the Europeans realizing that the U.S. may now be taking a sphere of influence approach to the world, and that they are not in our sphere, potentially. When they see Trump focusing on Greenland and Panama Canal and Canada and, sort of our region, they sense that things are shifting fundamentally, at least for the time being. So Friedrich Merz, the new Chancellor of Germany, has talked about the need now for European independence from the U.S. I don't think, certainly the Poles and other East Europeans are not in that mindset, but certainly the French have long talked about a greater independence from the U.S. So we'll see how that develops. The Germans are going to try to develop now a defense industry. They've removed the cap on debt. And so the Europeans are going to be taking independent steps that will bear watching. The EU has reached out now to the comprehensive TPP. They are actually entering a dialogue with China in the coming days, just as we are now. So there's some movement there. So we'll see how that unfolds going forward. Canada, of course, Mark Carney was just in the Oval Office, and he basically said Canada is not for sale, but that Canada does want to work with the U.S. to the extent possible, but as we are all seeing, public opinion and Canada has really turned against the US, at least for the time being. So we'll see how that unfolds. I'm a little concerned about the way some of these issues may come together late summer, early fall, because if you look geopolitically, there are two festering crises that may escalate in that time frame. One is Ukraine, where Russia clearly does not want a ceasefire. They're winning the war. Putin is talking about establishing a buffer zone, the safety zone in Ukraine, which might entail taking more oblasts than just the 4. They've massed troops now in the south. So we could see a Russian offensive get underway late spring, early summer when the mud season is over. And by fall, Ukraine could really be struggling. And the question will be then, what do we do? Do we step in more than we have? There'll be pressure on the West to react to this. And second, Gaza, and especially Iran. Trump says he wants to be a peacemaker. He talks about how the important thing is the wars you avoid. And so he's resisting Israeli pressure right now to do anything militarily against Iran. And we are meeting with the Iranians right now. Trump would like to strike a deal, and let's hope that that works out. But the Israelis are very strong on demanding a complete destruction of the Iranian nuclear capacity. 100%, no enrichment, not even 3.67%. The Iranians will not ever agree to that. So we could come into a situation by late summer, early fall, where the pressures to do something in Iran will be intense. And those two issues will coincide with more concrete examples of tariff effects. I think by then people will be feeling, unless something changes, in terms of inflation, in terms of products that are no longer easily available, they'll be feeling it much more. So those 3 things may come together in the fall. And so we'll see if that happens and how the administration handles it and whether it may cause them to ease up on their tariff policies in a situation of several crises going on. So I think I'll stop there. One last point I'll make. There are different schools in the Trump administration on foreign policy. There is still the very anti-China crowd, the Pete Navarros and others, who want to really focus like a laser on China. And they want to do a reverse Nixon, as they say, right? There was in 1971, we were pushing China and Russia together, which is really not in our interest in great power politics. And we reached out to the weaker of the 2 partners, which was China, in order to isolate Russia. And so now the argument is we should be reaching out to Russia more, draw them away, wean them away, in order to really focus on China. So once again, Putin is not going to make the compromises that would allow that. But it's interesting, last point I'll make, whereas the Biden administration basically cut off relations with China. I mean, there was almost no diplomacy and actually crossed a few nuclear red lines in Ukraine. And the Biden team is talking much more, yes, like a great power in that sense. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, recently speaking in Russian at a Russian event, described what Rubio is telling him. And here's what Rubio's message according to Lavrov, to the Russians have been. Number 1, the US now will follow its national interests. Previous administration did not follow US national interests. It was ideological, and it assumed that a unipolar world would last forever. 2, we recognize that other great powers have their interests as well. We recognize that. And number 3, when our interests overlap, we would be remiss if we did not cooperate. And so we should cooperate in those situations. But where our interests do not overlap, we must make sure that we avoid conflict. In other words, apparently Rubio is saying that there are great powers that can destroy the world, and it's in our national interest to be sure we don't take risks in that regard, no matter what the situation. So this is a very different tone from the previous administration. The Russians are seeing it and appreciating it, but there are other schools. There are other groups around Trump. And so, once again, a lot of uncertainty on the foreign policy. The Europeans do think we're heading to a sphere of influence approach more long term. And so we'll see what happens. The other problem, finally, is that it's not just the uncertainty of Trump. We are going back and forth every 4 years because we are polarized. Everything's being done by executive order, and executive orders can undo executive orders. And so the world sees us really going back and forth every 4 years. For companies and for governments, it makes it hard to plan long term in its relations with the U.S. and even with U.S. companies. So I'll stop there and I turn it over to Mike.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom. That was a very interesting introduction. And I think it really sets a good backdrop and scene for people to understand where we are, how we got to where we are today politically, and what some of the prospects are for going forward. To give you a little bit of background on my perspective, is I've been living in China full-time for 18 years. I've been doing business in China for over 25 years. And so, what I see day to day is I see, what is the Chinese press saying about these conflicts? What is the emphasis of the Chinese government to the Chinese people? And I think it's important to understand that in China, the economy hasn't done particularly well for a long time. The real estate sector was in a great deal of trouble. You had major developers collapse. You have lots of buildings that are finished and not being occupied. The consumer sector has retreated. They're less focused on higher end products now. More people are getting by. People are not investing their money. People are putting their money away in the banks. There's not a lot of consumer debt because people just aren't spending money. So I think a lot of what we see from the Chinese government is an attempt to encourage the local economy. It's a real focus on the nation of China, just like you have Trump focusing on the U.S. interests. Xi Jinping has been saying this for many years, well before Trump came into place, well before Biden came into place, that China should be independent and China should develop its own technologies, not be dependent on foreign powers, and go its own way. And if you look at the long-term history of China, I like to tell my friends overseas, 99% of the history, it's been a closed country. So the recent, the recent 30 years have been an aberration, and only occurs very rarely. Which is not to say that they won't continue to interact with foreign powers, but I think the Communist Party finds it a real nuisance and a major problem for maintaining stability in China to have to deal with these external disruptions. Now, professionally, in the last few years, my practice is focused on 3 areas. One is export licensing, the other is sanctions, and then most recently tariffs. And so I talk to clients every day about tariffs, every day about the problems that they're facing with tariffs, and every day about possible solutions to try to mitigate or even eliminate the problems that they're facing with tariffs. I think I was reading recently a statement by Ray Dalio, who's the founder of Bridgewater, which is the world's largest hedge fund management firm. And he said regarding China and the United States, he said, all parties doing business between China and the United States must now go about making alternative plans, regardless of what the next round of trade negotiations are like. So he's a student of history. He's a student of economics and history. He advises major clients around the world, including in China. And it's also a theme that I see playing out in these both in tariffs, but also in the export licensing, where we're going from an era of globalization really to an era of localization. And this is where we see a real focus of companies on individual country markets. We see them around the world. We've had tariffs in place in Europe for many, many years, protecting the agricultural sector, for example. We've seen tariffs. Tariffs are throughout history. We've seen a lot of tariffs. Most recently, it's become a hyper focus for the Trump administration. But I don't see, given the perspectives of these two major powers, major competing powers, I don't really forecast a resolution where we're not going to see at least some significant tariffs in place for an extended period of time. We also see countries around the world who are competing to attract new investments. China's competing to attract investments. The U.S., one of the emphasis we see the emphasis on tariffs, but there's a similar emphasis on attracting new businesses to China. We see an emphasis for the administration to generate revenues to address the national debt in the United States. So there are a lot of significant factors that are causing both of these countries to maintain some independence and lack of dependence on each other to develop their own markets, but also to protect against their competitors. As I said, export licensing is leading to a separation of markets. Every day you can read China press saying the U.S. is enacting export licensing requirements to slow down the development of China. That the reason that they're doing this is they want to keep China from developing further, to keep our economy from developing further. And this is the only reason. U.S. is saying we need these export licensing requirements to protect the United States from China using the advanced technologies for military purposes. Where's the truth? Well, there's some truth in all of this. Now, we've also seen a spillover going into the European Union. We see the U.S. is pressuring, for example, when the U.S. was pressuring telecommunication networks not to use Huawei technology on their telecommunication systems. This is the idea being that there's some sensitivity to these systems. So in China, in the U.S., we've seen a separation of data, technology, and financing infrastructures. We've seen a separation of biotechnology information, a separation of privacy information about consumers' use, about health records, about the financial records of people. Again, creating independent, we see major companies with cloud infrastructure. They have to have separate infrastructure in China and in the United States. So this is leading to these, as I said, to these individual country markets. And this is something that I think is going to be a very important factor for our clients to consider moving forward, which is not to say that you can't have opportunities there, but it's becoming, from my perspective, more of a China for China, US for US kind of business. That if you want to be successful in the China market, you should be manufacturing for the China market. It'll become much more difficult to manufacture in China for the US market. Similarly, for Chinese manufacturers, I expect to see them move manufacturing at least to some extent, to both low tariff countries and also to no tariff countries, which is the United States. So I think it's not unusual, it's not surprising to see the increase in M&A activity from around the world for people who are seeking to lower the impact of tariffs. And I expect that they'll this kind of movement, localization, is going to be a major trend that our clients are facing, and it's also a major opportunity. The tariffs themselves, it's as both Bob and Tom had indicated, it is a complex, rapidly changing situation. The first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I check the White House news to see what's happened, what's been announced, try to figure it out. So now we have a global 10% tariff on all countries exporting to the United States. We have reciprocal tariffs, which vary for each country who are exporting to the United States, depending on their relative balance of manufacturing trade. We have a separate program for certain products that are derived from steel and aluminum. This is under Section 232. So those products are not subject to the reciprocal tariffs. But how do you know what they are? Well, you have to look at a long list of HTS codes, and you have to check and see, do they properly describe the products that you're involved with, either exporting or importing. In addition to the Section 232 program, we have specific programs between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We have specific exemptions for certain products, certain electronic products, many auto parts, and other products. I think this will continue to change, continue to develop. So it makes it a very complex situation for clients. We constantly get questions from clients saying, look, I can't sort this out. How does this all make sense? And if you read every one of the multiple executive orders, you take a long time to understand what the net effect is on your business. So as I said, I check the White House executive orders every day. I subscribe to the Customs and Border Protection updates. I get them every day. Looking at them to see what's happening, and keep our clients informed. So what are some of the responses that people have been taking? Some effective and some creating great risk. We see a lot of creativity out there, but I think one thing that I think it's important for everyone to remember in the United States is that it's the importer who's primarily responsible for compliance with tariff laws. Unfortunately, the importer is many of the tariff laws turn on issues that the importer doesn't control. For example, certifications of the country of origin. So you see, some manufacturers saying, hey, the country of origin is, we make it in China, but we're going to ship it to, we'll ship it to a third country. We'll ship it to Korea. Korea has a relatively lower. That doesn't work. It shouldn't work. And I tell you, customs, Bob, I think, Bob had mentioned earlier that there's significant increase. I looked at the statistics today. The first 3 months of 2025, we have the same amount of enforcement that took place in 6 months in 2024. So it's doubled in the comparative time period. And I think it will continue to be increased. So there's a great deal of risk. When the manufacturer says, "Oh, here I have this clever way to minimize tariffs." Maybe it works once, maybe it works twice, but you know what? Customs and Border Protection can come back to you and say, you know, those transactions, we've decided that it's not legitimate, that the country of origin really was China. And it's not the manufacturer that's paying these tariffs. It's you, the importer. So you have to be very, very careful about any of these different techniques that can be used. Some are legitimate. You know, for example, there's one practice out there. It's called the first sales price. And this applies to three-party sales, where you have a manufacturer. Typically, it's a manufacturer, a trading company, and a customer. And if you meet the criteria, then the price at which the tariffs are calculated will be that first sale from the manufacturer to the trading company. So there's a potential to save a significant amount of money, but you have to meet the tests that are in that. So the tests are that you have to have two bona fide sales: the sale from the manufacturer to the trading company, and a sale from the trading company to the customer. The trading company can be related, can be a related company. It can be either related to the manufacturer or to the customer. But if it is, then there are stringent tests concerning the valuation. So you need to make sure that there's a arm's length sales price, especially, as I said, especially when affiliated party sales are involved. And the other criteria that is, in addition to having a bona fide sales, having arm's length valuation, the original manufacturer must be specifically intended for sale in the U.S. So if you're buying from a distributor who's taking stock and they sell it in many places around the world, that actually doesn't qualify for this first sales rule. It has to be specifically intended for sale in the U.S. Other approaches that we've seen involved people looking at the applicable codes. Remember, I said that the HTS codes can be critical in determining which tariffs apply. But I can also tell you, from personal experience, these codes are very, very specific, and that you have to be look at these codes, look at any ambiguities in these codes. You can consider precedents. The Customs and Border Protection maintains a database of previous determinations that they've made across a wide range of issues, including valuation, but also classification. You can request specific classification if you want to avoid the potential liability for choosing an improper code. So there are ways to resolve that uncertainty. Another issue that we've seen for clients involves sometimes manufacturers say, look, here, I'll give you two invoices. One invoice is for the product, and the other invoice are these services, which you can deduct from the value of the products that you're importing. Well, this doesn't work, right? This is considered, Customs and Border Protection considers this to be, they have a category, it's called assists. And assists include any costs, for example, cost of design, engineering, or other services that are related to the production of the product that are provided overseas. Now, especially in China because of the size of the tariffs. But any of these services, if they're charged separately, you, the importer, have to add those costs back in to the value of the products for the base on which you're calculating the tariffs. Now, interestingly, if you provide any of those services, design, engineering, or other services in the United States, it's not included in the value of the products. So it can be a technique to lower the relative value. Another way that people can legitimately impact the valuation of products for tariff calculation purposes is by changing the country of origin through the substantial transformation in another country with either low or no tariffs. So, for example, if you manufacture some components that go into a product, but those components are combined into a new and substantially different product in the United States, you're only taxed on the value of the parts themselves, and not based on the value of the finished product. But this is a highly subjective determination, right? So when is how much enough to substantially transform the nature of a product in order to change the country of origin? So again, here we have, we can look at precedents. We can look at previous determinations that Customs and Border Protection have made. We can certainly request determinations and rulings from Customs and Border Protection if there's a question. But it is I can tell you, it is a highly subjective determination. It's very fact specific. So you need to be very careful when you're trying to change the country of origin through substantial transformation in a third country outside of the country of manufacture, outside the of the United States. So it's a process. What we recommend to clients is, first of all, they need to carefully analyze what tariffs may apply to their business, to the products that they import, the products that they sell overseas. Is it the reciprocal tariffs? Is it the Section 232 tariffs? Or is it subject to special exemptions? Is it for the U.S.-Mexico, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement? Is it subject to special exemptions for electronic products or for automobile parts or whatever? Do we have some new changes that have come out? So this will set a baseline. Then we take a look at what are the production strategies that can be used to effectively reduce and possibly even eliminate tariffs in full compliance with applicable laws and regulations. In addition, while we're looking at these issues, we also have to take a look at export licensing laws for exports. And clients these days, there's such focus on exports of technology of a wide variety of issues that you would never have anticipated. Sometimes we hear people say, "Oh, there's no military use." It's not about military use. It's about what appears on the export licensing list. It's about who the customers are. So we need to review a special list of specially designated nationals to make sure that we're not having any products being exported to them. So we look at tariff compliance, export licensing. We look at sanctions if there's any possibility that we have some transactions affecting the Soviet Union or other other countries that are subject to sanctions. And we need to take a careful look at when there are questions, try to resolve those questions in a way that will resolve liability permanently, not just once or twice, and then you end up with a huge bill because someone comes back and says, well, we're taking a look at this and we really disagree with what you represented to us, or what the exporter represented to us. So now you, the importer, have to pay this fee. Going forward, as I said, I think a lot of this is going to be motivating country for country manufacturing operations. So, that can include greenfield projects overseas, where you're starting up in a new country. And sometimes it's easier to go with start with a joint venture, and you can look at, for example, we're seeing joint ventures between manufacturers in one country and distributors in another. So we have more of a complementarity of interests. We're also seeing a lot of interest in, we're already seeing a lot of activity in M&A. And this raises, I think, interesting opportunities for owners of traditional manufacturing businesses in the United States and in Europe, because now you have a new class of buyers, potential buyers from China and from Southeast Asia, who are interested in businesses that, frankly, would be very difficult to find a buyer otherwise. So I think and this kind of M&A, I think, will also increase in the other direction, where we'll see, people, U.S. companies setting up standalone operations in the United States, in China, where you have Chinese technology, where you have Chinese products for the China market, and and you'll have country-specific databases. We even see now where there's questions about providing information about personnel, from China, being able to send that to the United States. So this is, as I said at the outset, I think this is a major trend. I expect it to continue. In any event, I think that probably the safest course is to plan for this and make careful preparation and take effective steps to protect yourselves from potential liability and realize significant opportunities through a different approach to international business. So when I wrap up there,
Great.
we can go.
Thank you, Mike. That was great. I think we can move into Q&A. And I see we have a few questions in our chat, but maybe before we get to the chat questions, just to build on one of the points Mike made about all the pressure supply chain managers and companies are under to mitigate sort of this new normal with tariffs. I think, the temptation to cut corners is always there, and no surprise, as counsel, my recommendation would be to resist that temptation to the maximum extent that you can. I think on our M&A deals, tariff and trade compliance has taken on a much larger significance. So if you're looking to sell your business in a few years, buyers will be looking at what you did during this period. Did you cut corners? Did you increase the risks that they might inherit? What's the risk exposure? So it's been a very difficult time for a lot of our clients working through this and restructuring their whole supply chain and trying to anticipate what's coming. But sometimes their suppliers are providing solutions that are a little too perfect, right? And we've already got this supply factory in Thailand, so it's all set up and everything seems to work fine, and it's easy to say great because we definitely don't want to pay 100+% on the tariff. But Customs and Border Control, they are aware of these practices, and as Mike said, the enforcement's likely going to be much more significant than we've ever seen in the past. So I think what we've seen in the past with a lot of buyers is they might have, when they look at targets, and they might have said, this is a billion-dollar company, or this for this size company, they don't have much of a trade compliance program. It's not very robust, but that's fine. I think a lot of our clients on the buy side are not going to be giving that same level of pass to companies. And so, really important to get it right and to think about kind of what the long-term consequences of some of these adjustments in your supply chain are going to be for the company. Maybe turning back to Tom for a second, I was curious, a couple of things that you were saying about the cabinet, and I'm wondering if you could just speculate a bit based on your distinguished career in government. How do you think, so Besson is heading to Switzerland for this delegation. I think Jameson Greer is going to be with him. I didn't see anything about Stephen Moran or anybody else. But I guess the question would be, like, how do you think this trade policy, they have a lot to do, right? And it seems like a lot of it is falling on Jameson Greer, U.S. trade rep. I guess he was the chief of staff under Lighthizer. But how do you view, how does the coordination work among Treasury, U.S. trade rep, I guess the Commerce Department, and then there's like advisors like Stephen Moran you mentioned. Is he just sort of he's in a think tank as the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and he's just producing policy papers? What's the role of the State Department in this, and in the local embassies? And like, can you just kind of share a little bit of color on how you think sort of the sausage gets made on that front, given all that they have to work on over the next couple of months in terms of the trade deals and negotiations?
Yeah, and that's a tricky question. I think in this case, it's still gelling and shaking down. Whether it will ever fully shake down, given Trump's leadership style, where at key moments, whatever the bureaucracy has been doing, he can come in from the side and things change fundamentally. There are many actors. I think J.D. Vance actually has a role here, more than one would think. And there's a fellow named Eldridge Colby, who I think is also influential. These are people who are not economists per se, but are looking at these larger, so we say, great power dynamics that I mentioned before, on how to approach China and Russia. And so, because a part of the mix previously has been things like Taiwan and other issues that stir up the relationship. During the Biden time, there were attempts to negotiate with China on things like fentanyl and other issues, and Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan just threw all that into a cocked hat for months. The Chinese basically cut off the kind of negotiating and trading that people, like Besant now are trying to do. So it's unclear to me how that aspect is going to come together, whether this administration really will downplay Taiwan. So far, Trump has barely mentioned Taiwan. This is such a contrast from Biden, for whom this was right up front. And as I say, it was a key issue in this democracy, autocracy paradigm that he had. So, and also, I'm not clear, what the relative influence will be between Besant, Moran, who came up with this strategy, Peter Navarro, who is still there. And of course, there are strong voices in Congress. So, as I say, it's very hard to predict. I think right now, Besant is probably the stabilizing factor in all this. And so if he's heading the negotiations, that's a good thing. The State Department and other agencies, are being upended by DOGE. And so very hard to see. I mean, Rubio has an influence, but the department itself right now is quite destabilized by what's happening in DOGE. I mean, there are, one of the practices as DOGE comes in is to take over communications. And so there's a sense at state that people are being monitored and watched, and there's a kind of a chilling atmosphere right now at state that I'm hearing about, and not to mention people leaving. So, and by the way, the dismantling of USAID is also providing an opening to China on key economic issues, being able to present themselves as a reliable partner. So we'll see what happens now with China. I think that these negotiations will be very, very preliminary, just sort of getting a dialogue going. I think it's interesting that the Chinese in agreeing to this this meeting now in Switzerland over the weekend, and in explaining to the Chinese people why they are willing to talk, they said that they're responding to requests and appeals from U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers. They're presenting themselves as defenders of U.S. business. Once the talks get going, it's as it is. It's not just economic. You know, the things like Taiwan enter in, and fentanyl, for example. So the Chinese have signaled that they may be willing to do more on fentanyl as part of these negotiations. So we'll see what elements come together to try to I mean, these tariffs of 145 and 125 can't continue. Everyone realizes that. And Bessent has said that too, publicly said that this can't continue. So they're going to try to bring them down, I think, step by step. I agree with Mike that I think we're going to have significant tariffs for quite a while going forward, even if there's some progress on this. So yeah, that's basically it. But as somebody who looks at geopolitics, I'm just very fascinated on what our approach will be to Taiwan. I know The Economist had an article in this current issue kind of warning that Taiwan may be a little more vulnerable now, given all this mix of factors that we've been describing.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I think, Mike, from your vantage point, I was in Asia a couple months ago, and no one was really talking about the Taiwan risk, but it seems like everybody talks about it here in the U.S. What's been your perspective on that, Mike?
Well, yeah, I think most people over here are just they're minding their own business. Their business, literally, their own business, their own personal family and stuff. And if you ask, Chinese, is Taiwan part of China? They'll say, oh, absolutely. And we'll fight to the end. Are they have any plans? I don't. I mean, I think you have to look at recent history and look where China took over Hong Kong, and it just turned into a major disaster. Public relations, economic. A lot of what made Hong Kong successful is just destroyed. It was and if they tried to do the same thing with Taiwan, I think everybody knows that it would be just even military. Once if they took it over militarily, what would they do with it? It would just be a major headache. They've got too many other important things going on right now. So only if they felt threatened, the only scenario I would see is if the party felt like they were losing control and they had to do something to consolidate, people's sense of patriotism. But it's not that bad here. It's nowhere near that. So I just don't see that as being a likely scenario. There's just nothing in it. Really.
What I think, Mike, you just got back from Singapore. I was there in February, and I was on a panel where we were talking about the NVIDIA chips, and one of the Singapore panelists was quick to chime in that the government looked into that, and that was not, a lot of those chips were not getting the Chinese, and it seemed like Singapore continues to try to, play sort of the Switzerland of Asia. Any observations from your recent trip there? How are they dealing with a lot of this at the moment? They are one of the few countries that have a surplus with the U.S., so they're not on the bad list at this point.
Yeah. Frankly, one of the reasons I went to Singapore is because a lot of international companies have been setting up operations in Singapore, and I was meeting with law firms down there who have clients that are affected by tariffs. So I think the sense there is that Singapore wants to maintain good relations with all sides. They view themselves, I think, as the Switzerland of Asia. Because they're relatively small, but they have a significant international aspect to them. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention about China is that there's two recent developments in the United States and China, and that is you have this DeepSeek AI and the Huawei chip in the telephone. And so it's kind of a, again, this goes to this national pride, separate technology developing in China, that really, I think everybody acknowledges, has nothing to do with people going around export licensing. And I think again, it's also part of that same trend, just it's country for country. And, this kind of technology is going to continue to develop in China. It's slowed down, but it'll continue to develop.
We had a couple of questions from the chat. I think one was about Minnesota's E85 ethanol initiative, standard impact auto-related trade with China coming and going. I don't have much of an opinion on that one. I don't know, Mike, if you've looked at that.
Yeah, I think that the Chinese government has made a real focus on imposing tariffs and suspending purchases of agricultural products, especially from states that they perceive to be influential on Trump. So I think it's clearly from my perspective, clearly a political calculation where they're saying we want to affect those supporters of Trump to put pressure on him through having impacts on major economies within the Trump supporting states. So I expect to see more of that.
One other question was kind of differences in tariff concerns between sort of American clients and some of other sort of non-American clients.
Other non-American clients. Well, it depends what they're subject to, right? So, with the reciprocal tariffs, then there's a wide variety of impacts, but there's significant impacts. So everybody's looking at the same kinds of issues about country of origin, about the ways to these single this tri-party, using trade companies to reduce tariffs, about doing manufacturing in different countries. So it just depends on what the specific tariffs are for their country. So Canada, we had we had clients doing business between Canada and the United States, and so the issue for them was, how do they comply with this USMCA agreement, and how can they verify that, and how can they make sure that there's no risk that Customs and Border Protection comes on later on and says, actually, it doesn't really qualify under that agreement. So everybody has it's very important to understand that each client's unique situation and the issues that they're facing, and come up with solutions that are appropriate for that. And it affects all countries to greater or less extent in a different way.
Tom, can we shift back to Europe for a minute? And
Sure.
maybe if you want to just share some thoughts on kind of the recent elections in Germany, and kind of the impact there in terms of sort of incoming president relationship with the U.S. and orientation towards Asia, and anything that you're seeing there. There's obviously been a lot going on in the UK and France on that front, but Ukraine war, you've touched on a few of these things that will be quite impactful in terms of how we approach all of that. But I guess Germany had just amended their constitution, right, for so that they could finance defense spending. And but just kind of more focus on trade. Anything that you're seeing out of kind of the current incoming administration in Germany, and kind of how things might be different?
Yeah, I mean, in Europe in general, the Ukraine war has had a big impact on their economies. In a way, the war in Ukraine has been a plus for us, right? Because we were exporting more natural gas, and we are doing more arms sales now that the Europeans are trying to build up their defense capacities. But the Europeans really, their dependence, especially Germany's, on Russian oil and gas, they're having a very hard time making that up. So the idea is kind of to do what Russia has done in the Ukraine war. Russia has militarized its economy, restructured it for defense spending, and their economy is rocking along. Actually, it's distorted, but it's fairly solid apparently. And so whether the Europeans can do that, given their deep divisions within the countries and even among the countries of Europe, our presence there and our umbrella has kept them unified in a way. And if we are really stepping back, some of the fissures will appear. I'm watching the fact that some countries now are saying that they're going to have to get nuclear weapons on their own. Poland, Donald Tusk has said publicly that Poland eventually now is going to try to get nuclear weapons. The South Koreans on the other side are doing the same. So in Germany, Merz failed to get a majority in the first vote to become chancellor yesterday. That was a real shocker. The first time that's ever happened. He's not that popular. Since his election, his numbers have been going down, down, down. And the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, the far right party, now is in the polls the #1 party in Germany. And very controversial, the security forces in Germany now have declared them a national security risk and are going to be monitoring them more. And Marco Rubio launched a tweet against the Germans saying that monitoring that party in that way is a form of tyranny. And he built upon what J.D. Vance said about the Europeans in his Munich speech. So there are tensions and dislocations right now in the transatlantic relationship, but also within Europe itself. Starmer is very unpopular. Nigel Farage had a very successful election. He's the far right candidate in Britain. Same thing. Le Pen, lost a court case. She is theoretically banned from politics for a time, but she's the second most popular politician. So, and of course, the European Union is taking a very, very pro-NATO, pro-US approach, but they also are very unpopular in many parts of individual European countries. So I don't know what the prospects are going to be. I fear there'll be an increasing growth of these right-wing parties, which are skeptical of the US in some cases and more open to relations with Russia. And so, yeah, it's going to be difficult for these 27 countries, in my mind, to come up with effective responses to a lot of things. Meanwhile, I wanted to also mention that Vladimir Putin gave a very important speech last month to the industrialists of Russia, to about 1,600 of their top CEOs and economic leaders. And he had a very clear message, and that is the sanctions will never end. We must plan long-term for sanctions. Therefore, orient yourselves toward the BRICS, toward Turkey, toward China, obviously. There's talk that a second Power of Siberia pipeline will develop. So this, to me, this ties into Mike's point about the Chinese desire for more independence. Russia is clearly on the same wavelength. They are pulling back from Europe. They want to stabilize Ukraine, but they're looking to the east. So I see what's happening right now will be a major impetus to further development within Eurasia among these various organizations. The BRICS, the China-Russian relationship, I think, is going to get stronger. And I think that a lot of the energy going forward may be there, and that our tariffs are actually provoking it to some degree and making more countries in Eurasia open to the kind of cooperation that China and Russia want to foster. So yeah, I think that what we're discussing here with U.S. tariffs it plays into a much larger tectonic shift that's going on right now. And I'd almost advise U.S. companies to get involved in that space. I mean, there are a lot of restrictions in doing so, but within the BRICS and some of the initiatives that will be going on there. And once again, this BRICS Pay platform will really bear watching, and how we react to it.
Just kind of one follow-up question on that in terms of Merz. So Chancellor Merz, do you see anybody in the U.S., whether it's Rubio's team, that have kind of traditionally had strong rapport with either Chancellor Merz or Germany, and then sort of corollary is how would you grade Rubio's performance so far?
Yeah. So the thing about Merz is he has a finance background, right? So BlackRock. Now that's good. Macron also comes out of a finance backdrop. So the relations between France and Germany could well get improved now. Merz is from the CDU party, the Christian Democrats. So is von der Leyen, head of the EU structure now. So there again, there'll be good rapport. So there's hope in Europe that Germany will meld in better now to the institutions and to the personalities. In terms of the U.S., as I say, he may have contacts in our financial sector. He has not been, to my knowledge, a frequent visitor to Washington in the past. I'm sure in some of the think tanks there are good relations. But I see, if anything, right now, in the current team of around Trump are actually they feel a certain estrangement from Europe, whether it's especially Vance, I think, Hegseth. So I don't see personality-wise the bridges. That the era of strong German and Russian specialists in the U.S. government and even in Congress is over. We don't have that kind of specialization anymore. One of the reforms that they're envisaging at state is to make for more regional experts, that diplomats will not serve in different parts of the world. They'll serve in one part of the world and become real experts on that, which might be a good thing. So yeah, I worry about the transatlantic relationship in that regard, that the generation coming out of World War II, where there were strong bridges, strong studying in each other's countries. We had German departments all over the U.S. They're gone now, totally gone. So yeah, I don't see necessarily those kind of bridges anymore. And Merz is kind of an aloof figure. As I say, he's going down in the polls in Germany right now. He's not, he doesn't exactly have great people skills from what one can see. So, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, and personal view is that longer term, I see Europe with time getting drawn into Eurasia, that the Eurasian economy that may be developing, that was happening before Ukraine. I mean, Germany's whole economy was based on resources from Russia and markets in China. And of course, China is shifted now. It's not the same thing, but I think there still are potential opportunities for European economies looking into Eurasia. And we'll see more and more of that. And maybe our tariffs will spur some of that as well.
I see we got 1 minute left. Mike, do you want to finish off with any comment?
Well, just sort of go back to one point about like the Russia and China relationship. I mean, I can say that these days, walking down the street in China, the second most common foreign language you hear is Russian. And 5 years ago, you wouldn't hear a single Russian here. So it's a lot of them are tourists, but there's certainly quite a few businessmen here as well. And it's kind of an interesting development.
A lot of tourists because there's few places that I guess they can go and spend their money.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe they're being encouraged, whatever. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to come to China for sure, but it's certainly a large percentage of, as I said, the large percentage of the foreigners these days they're not from Europe, they're not from the United States, they're from Russia.
Are there many U.S. students around and visible?
Not at all.
No.
Very important. Very few European U.S. students. Not like it used to be, or business or expats, whatever. Most of my friends left. So. different place.
Well, let's try to, we'll end on time. And thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everybody, for joining. And thanks again to our co-sponsors, Gold Minnesota, Minnesota International Business Council, Minnesota Committee on Foreign Relations. Thank you for everyone joining today. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.